Imagine this. A man so dangerous, so calculating that he could order the assassination of a country's most respected judges, bomb historic landmarks, and bring an entire government to its knees, all while hiding in plain sight, never leaving his hometown. For 23 years, he walked the streets, attended family dinners, and raised his children, while law enforcement searched desperately for a ghost. But here's what they didn't understand until it was almost too late. Salvatore Riina wasn't just waging war against the Italian state. He had a plan so unthinkable, so unprecedented in the history of organized crime, that when investigators finally uncovered the full scope of what he was preparing to do, they realized they weren't fighting a criminal. They were fighting a terrorist who wanted to hold an entire nation hostage. Keep watching because what you're about to learn about his final strategy will leave you speechless. Sicily, 1980s. The island that gave birth to the mafia was drowning in blood. But this wasn't the romantic, honor-bound mafia of Hollywood films. This was something far more terrifying. And at the center of it all was a short, stocky man with cold, dead eyes. A man the Sicilian people would come to call the Beast, Salvatore Riina. His name alone was enough to make grown men weep. Prosecutors slept with guns under their pillows. Judges wrote their wills before going to work. Politicians whispered his name only behind closed doors. Because everyone knew, if Riina wanted you dead, you were already a ghost. But how does one man, born into poverty in the rural Sicilian town of Corleone, become powerful enough to declare war on an entire country? The answer lies in understanding something most people never grasp about organized crime at this level. It's not about being the toughest guy in the room. It's about being the most ruthless, the most strategic, and the most willing to destroy everything and everyone that stands between you and absolute power. Riina understood this from the very beginning. While other mafiosi played by the old rules, the code of honor, the respect for tradition, Riina saw these rules as weaknesses to exploit. In the 1970s, the Sicilian mafia was divided into families, each controlling different territories and rackets. There was an unwritten understanding. You don't kill prosecutors. You don't kill police chiefs. And you certainly don't attack the state. Why? Because when you attack the state attacks back with everything it has. But Riina looked at this calculation and saw opportunity. He realized that if you hit the state hard enough, fast enough, and brutally enough, you could make them afraid. And fear, he knew, was the ultimate weapon. His rise to power began with a bloodbath. In what would become known as the Second Mafia War, Riina's Corleonesi clan systematically eliminated every rival family that stood in their way. But this wasn't traditional gang warfare. Riina innovated. He pioneered the use of car bombs, turning Palermo's streets into war zones. He didn't just kill his enemies. He killed their families, their friends, anyone who might one day seek revenge. Between 1981 and 1983, over 1,000 people were murdered. The streets of Palermo ran red. Bodies were found dissolved in acid, strangled, shot, blown apart, and through it all, Riina remained invisible, a phantom orchestrating death from the shadows. But here's what made Riina truly terrifying: the system he built to maintain power. Understand this. Organized crime at the level Riina operated functions like a corporation, but one where failure means death. He restructured the Sicilian mafia into a pyramid with himself at the apex. Orders flowed down through a network of trusted intermediaries called men of honor. These weren't random thugs. These were intelligent, disciplined operatives who understood the value of silence. Communication happened through a system called pizzini. Tiny handwritten notes passed through intermediaries. No phones, no electronic trail. Just paper, memorization, and absolute loyalty. The principle of omerta, the code of silence, wasn't just tradition under Riina. It was enforced through terror. If you talked, you died. If your family talked, they died. If investigators even suspected you might talk, you disappeared. This created a wall of silence, so impenetrable that even when police arrested mafiosi with direct knowledge of murders, they said nothing. They would rather spend life in prison than break omerta because they knew prison walls couldn't protect them from Riina's reach. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the Italian government just crush him? Here's the dark truth. They tried. And that's when Riina made his most calculated, most brutal decision. He decided to teach the Italian state a lesson they would never forget. If the government wanted war, He would give them war unlike anything they had ever seen. In 1982, General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, a legendary anti-mafia investigator, was sent to Sicily with extraordinary powers to destroy the mafia. He was a hero, a man who had fought terrorism and never backed down. Riina studied him, watched him, and then made an example. On September 3, 1982, as Dalla Chiesa drove through Palermo with his young wife, a death squad opened fire with automatic weapons, killing them both in a hail of bullets. The message was clear. No one is untouchable. Not generals, not heroes, not even the innocent. But Riina wasn't finished sending messages. He was just getting started because what he understood and what terrified Italian authorities was that every act of violence he committed wasn't random. It was strategic. It was designed to demonstrate that the mafia could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. And more importantly, that the cost of fighting them would be higher than the Italian people were willing to pay. The 1990s brought Riina's war to its most devastating phase. Judge Giovanni Falcone had done what many thought impossible. He had begun to crack the code of the Sicilian mafia. Through years of painstaking investigation, Falcone had built cases that resulted in the Maxi trial. Hundreds of mafiosi convicted and sent to prison. Riina's empire was under siege, and Riina's response was as brutal as it was calculated. On May 23, 1992, as Falcone drove from the airport with his wife and 3 police escorts, Riina's men detonated 500 kilograms of explosives buried under the highway. The blast was so powerful it registered on seismic monitors as an earthquake. The explosion created a crater large enough to swallow cars. Falcone, his wife, and the 3 officers were killed instantly. Italy wept. The world watched in horror. And Riina's message rang out loud and clear. This is what happens when you challenge us. But he still wasn't done. 57 days later, Riina ordered another massive car bomb. This time the target was Judge Paolo Borsellino, Falcone's friend and colleague, who had vowed to continue the fight. The bomb killed Borsellino and 5 members of his security detail. 2 of Italy's greatest heroes, murdered in cold blood. The nation was paralyzed with grief and fear. If you're shocked by what you're hearing, if you can't believe one man could orchestrate this level of violence and terror, share this video with someone who needs to understand how organized crime really works at its highest levels. Because what happened next reveals something even more disturbing about the machinery Riina had built. After the assassinations of Falcone and Borsellino, the Italian government unleashed everything they had. Thousands of arrests, military presence in Sicily, new anti-mafia laws. The pressure was immense. Most criminals would have retreated, gone underground, waited for things to cool down. But Riina wasn't most criminals. He was preparing to escalate beyond anything anyone thought possible. Because remember that unthinkable plan I mentioned at the beginning? The one that, when discovered, revealed just how far Riina was willing to go? We're about to uncover it. Riina's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. He believed that if the Italian state wanted to wage total war against the mafia, then the mafia would wage total war against Italian society itself. Not just against prosecutors and police, against the very symbols of Italian culture and heritage. He ordered a bombing campaign against Italy's most precious landmarks. In 1993, the bombs began. The Uffizi Gallery in Florence, one of the world's greatest art museums, was bombed, killing 5 people and destroying priceless Renaissance artworks. Churches were targeted. Cultural monuments were attacked. These weren't military targets. These weren't government buildings. These were attacks designed to terrorize an entire population, to make every Italian citizen feel unsafe, to break the collective will of the nation. But here's what investigators discovered that sent chills down their spines. Riina's plan went even further. When they finally arrested him in January 1993 and began unraveling his network, they uncovered lists, target lists. And on those lists were some of Italy's most sacred sites: the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the Colosseum, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Riina had been planning to bomb Italy's most iconic landmarks, structures that represented not just Italian culture, but human civilization itself. Think about the audacity of this. A single mafia boss, operating from a small Sicilian town, had assembled the resources, the network, and the sheer willpower to threaten the destruction of World Heritage sites. He was willing to attack symbols that millions of people around the world cherished. And why? To force the Italian government to negotiate, to back down, to accept that the mafia was more powerful than the state. This was the revelation. This was the answer to how one man declared war on an entire country. He understood that power isn't just about violence. It's about making your enemy believe that you're willing to destroy everything they hold sacred, that there are no lines you won't cross, that negotiation is the only option, because the alternative is too horrific to contemplate. But here's the irony. Riina's ultimate strategy failed. By going too far, by attacking not just the state, but the soul of Italy, he unified the Italian people against him in a way that nothing else could have. The bombings that were meant to break the nation's will instead hardened it. Public outrage forced politicians who had been complicit or compliant to finally act. The wall of silence began to crack as even mafiosi started cooperating with authorities, horrified by the indiscriminate violence. Riina was arrested in January 1993, found living quietly in Palermo, just a few kilometers from the police headquarters that had been searching for him for over 2 decades. He spent the rest of his life in prison, dying in 2017, never showing a moment of remorse for the hundreds, perhaps thousands of deaths he had ordered. But his legacy remains. He proved that in the modern world, organized crime can evolve into something that resembles terrorism. That a criminal empire, if ruthless and strategic enough, can challenge a government's authority. And that the cost of fighting such evil is measured not just in money or resources, but in lives, in blood, in the very fabric of society. The story of Salvatore Riina isn't just about one man's brutality. It's a dark lesson in how power can be seized and wielded when someone is willing to abandon every moral constraint. It's a warning about what happens when organized crime is allowed to grow unchecked. And it's a testament to the courage of those like Falcone and Borsellino, who knew the cost of fighting evil, but chose to fight anyway. If you want to learn more about the darkest chapters of real-life crime, about the people who walked through hell to bring criminals like Riina to justice, then subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell, because we dive deep into stories that reveal the truth about how power, corruption, and violence really operate in our world. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, and understanding them might be the only way to prevent history from repeating itself.